What's up, folks? Welcome to another episode of Sustainable Sedition Radio, a podcast that's dedicated to help you build a life that thrives in changing times. And today, I'm headed to town, as usual, on my 55-minute commute from our little mountain getaway. And, I'll tell you what, the commute's kind of a pain in the ass sometimes, but think about it. There's a lot of folks who live in the city somewhere who have to, drive 20 miles to work, and they spend an hour and a half, 2 hours in the middle of, bumper-to-bumper traffic on the middle of a freeway. And I've got this beautiful mountain drive looking over these ridges and these valleys and all these pine trees up here in beautiful Northern California that, hey, you know what? Could be worse. Not trying to brag, but definitely grateful for what I got, even though it's kind of a pain in the ass sometimes. I'm going to be taking paternity leave here. I'm officially on it. And just kind of taking some time off. Getting ready for this baby. And not here yet. But we're a week closer than we were last week. And I've been saying that for almost 2 weeks now. So it's really ramping up. And I'll tell you what, my lady is ready to not be pregnant anymore. I'll tell you that. So we're doing the best we can, and in the midst of all that, I've just been really thinking about what's best for my family, for what's best for me, and for my wife, and for my kids in this situation that we're in, and considering the larger socioeconomic situation that we're all in, what our place is within that, and how to navigate that effectively as a family. What I can do to make sure that we're set up for success. And last week we covered the basics, like the fundamentals of preparedness. And by no means did we get into every single thing that we possibly could have, but we definitely got into some stuff that's just the foundation. You really want to start building a life that's more prepared for shit to go wrong, for you to lose your job, or for some kind of natural disaster, or some localized disaster, or civil unrest, or any one of the 1,000,001 things that can go wrong. How to build a life that's kind of ready for those, that allows you a little bit more wiggle room than just living hand to mouth from paycheck to paycheck. How can we start really thinking ahead and making sure that we're in as much of a position of strength as possible to deal with whatever it is that's coming down the pipeline. Now this week, we're going to talk a little bit about the storm itself. We're living in some really tumultuous times, guys, in every way that you can possibly imagine, politically, socially, and especially economically. And I've been spending a lot of time researching and learning and trying to understand economics and how money works and how our system is set up and what that means for every single one of us that are tethered to it, whether we like it or not. This is just kind of what we're born into, and it's what we have to deal with, and it's our circumstances to either own up to where we're at and do our best that we can with what we've been given, or to just be another victim of a system that really doesn't care for you other than what you can provide for it. So we all know that the dollar is not doing so hot, right? But it's actually a lot more serious than that. The dollar is not just collapsing, guys. It's dying. Like a patient with terminal cancer. Now, today, I'm going to try to explain what the hell I'm talking about when I say that. And I'm going to try to keep this more, boring, academic type topic. I'm going to just try to keep it interesting for you guys and try to make it a little bit more dynamic and engaging so that hopefully it sticks, because this is really important stuff for all of us to know. And hopefully I can help you understand some of these complex things that have taken me a while to figure out. And hey, I'm still learning. I'm still trying to figure it out. And if you already, have been introduced to this stuff and you got your head wrapped around it pretty well, but you struggle with being able to break it down and simplify it for someone who maybe isn't as familiar with what we're talking about today, hopefully some of the examples and ways of discussing what we're going to be talking about can help you to simplify this very complex issue. So, right off the bat, to get started, we're going to have to go way back in time to when the tumor, we'll call it, of our terminally ill cancer patient, when our tumor first started to form. And that was back in 1913. And, when we're talking about our patient here, we're talking about the United States as a nation and as an economic system. So, in 1913, the Congress passed the Federal Reserve Act. Now, that created a so-called central bank that is not federal, that has nothing to do with the federal government. It doesn't have any reserves, and it's not owned by the people or the government itself. It's a cartel of private banks that lends money to the government at interest. So every dollar is created by borrowing that equal amount of value from the Federal Reserve. That means that every single dollar that you have in your pocket or in your wallet or in your hand, it's a loan. It's a loan on value. It's not real value. And since we owe interest on every dollar, we always have to borrow more just to keep up. The system only works if the debt keeps on growing. No debt means no dollars, right? And no new dollars means we can't keep up with our spending habits and the whole thing collapses. It's like a hamster wheel that can never stop, right? I'm a metaphor guy, so I'll put it to you guys like this. Imagine you fell into a deep hole, right? And you've got a shovel in your hand. You're stuck. You can't get out. So you try to dig up some dirt to build up a pile that's going to help you climb out of the hole. You're trying to use the tools that you got, right? But the problem is that every shovel of dirt that you use to try and build up that pile, it makes the hole even deeper. So the more that you try to escape by digging, the worse the whole situation gets for you. And that's how debt-based money works. You're borrowing just so you can stay afloat. But the system needs you to keep digging, because if you stop, then the whole thing collapses. Now, the Fed, right, very shortly after it was spoken into existence and created, right, it started to print too much money. And it made that money too easy to borrow. And it helped to cause the market crash in 1929 that led to the Great Depression. Right? So now after that, let's go forward to 1933, a little bit forward. FDR signed an executive order that made it illegal for any U.S. citizen to own any gold whatsoever. It was basically turning all of your gold over to the government, or you go to jail. That was it. This took away people's financial sovereignty, and it made them completely dependent on these Federal Reserve debt notes. And that's what these dollars are. That's what they were then. That's what they are now. Even more so now than they were back then. And it made it so that the only people who could exchange their dollars for gold were foreign nations. You couldn't take your dollar and go into the bank anymore and exchange it for the 1/35th of an ounce of gold that your $1 was worth. right? We'll get into that a little bit more. We'll get into the gold standard in a second here. I'll help you guys break it down, understand it. We're just going through the history right now. So now World War II started to unravel, right? And that was kind of like a blessing in disguise for the U.S. at that point. It was like a steroid injection for the economy. That was just crawling out of the Great Depression. You know, all of a sudden we're producing tanks, ships, planes, and bombs and bullets, and it pulled us out of the Great Depression. But it came at a price. We created a permanent wartime economy. And that's like the real birth of you know, the modern day military industrial complex. Okay? That's where it all stems from. Is what we did to recover after the Great Depression. That's the only thing that brought us back. War money. So, in 1944, as World War II was starting to come to a close, Europe and Japan were just screwed, you know? They were just in shambles, just bombed to oblivion. Their economies were destroyed, the infrastructure was destroyed, and they needed help. And the U.S. was sitting on 2/3 of the world's gold, right? Our factories were booming. The dollar was still tied to gold at $35 an ounce. You could take $35, you could walk into a bank, and you could exchange it for a whole ounce of gold, right? The rest of the world that was struggling was just like, yeah, screw it. We'll just tie our currencies to the dollar. So that's what they did. They based the value of their currency during, you know, rebuild post-war time on the gold-backed dollar. And it worked because it kept the dollar honest. Because the dollar was tethered to a fixed amount of gold. So everybody trusted it. And that deal between all of the nations of the world was called the Bretton Woods system. Every dollar was like a receipt or like an IOU for a fixed amount of gold, right? Again, $35 could be exchanged for a whole ounce of gold. And other countries could come in and they could cash in their dollars for physical gold if they wanted to, right? So now let's go forward a little bit into the 60s. Now the US started cheating a little bit. Now all of these other economies in the world, all these foreign nations are like totally tethered to the dollar. We're the top dog. We're doing great. Everybody's dependent on us, and things are just looking great over here in the United States. So we start to overextend a little bit. We start cheating. We started printing more dollars than we actually had in gold to pay for things like the Vietnam War, right? And to pay for, Lyndon Johnson's Great Society and like the social programs that came with that, welfare, Medicare, Medicaid, etc. And that combination, those extra wartime funds and the social programs started putting us into serious debt with the Federal Reserve. And then these other countries that their entire economy depended on the stability of the dollar, they started to take notice, and they started to get really nervous. To the point where in 1965, France sent a naval warship to New York to physically collect all of their gold holdings and bring that all back to France. Now it wasn't an act of aggression, but it was a symbol. It symbolized the loss of trust in the dollar on a global scale at that point. And then other countries saw this, and it was like a catalyst, and all these other countries started to follow suit. And they're like, hey, we want our gold back. Here's your dollars. Give us our gold. Now, this risked like totally cleaning out Fort Knox, which is where we store all of our gold reserves. And if that happened, it would have caused the U.S. to go totally bankrupt and default, right? And it would have been like a Great Depression on crack if that had happened. We would have just been toast. So in 1971, Nixon closed the gold window. And I am like by no means a Nixon fan at all, but just to, humanize the situation here a little bit. Imagine that you're the guy who's in charge in a time where you have to make the decision to either plummet the country into total bankruptcy and the worst depression and collapse that we had ever known, or to come up with some, jimmy-rigged solution to try and get us out of it and to push it off to the next guy, right? And so that's exactly what he did. It's exactly what Nixon did. And in an attempt to, save the economy, he, quote-unquote, temporarily decoupled the dollar from the gold standard. But what that also meant was that the government could now print an unlimited amount of money. Because it wasn't backed by anything. And the Fed's just happy to oblige at that point. So that's when the dollar became what's called a fiat currency. Now, fiat in Latin means simply let it be done. That's what that word fiat means. So a fiat currency means that there's nothing backing it. There's no solid assets, no hard assets that are backing that currency, other than the say-so or the decree of the state. And the people, the public, trusting the government's word. Now, by doing that, they didn't stop the whole thing from falling in on itself, but they were able to push it off for a little while. They decided to, shove it off until tomorrow. It was like finding a tumor on yourself somewhere and just ignoring it and pretending it's not there, and you just carry on with your day, and that's it. You move on, you forget about it. So a few years later, in 1974, the US cut the petrodollar deal with Saudi Arabia, right? And basically what happened there is, in exchange for military protection and security, the Saudis, who were the foremost producer of oil at that time in the world, they would only exchange that oil in global markets for dollars. So what this did is, even though the US dollar had lost some credibility on the global scale once we decoupled from gold, now this made it so that, hey, if any of you guys wants oil to keep your economies going and to keep your industries going, you need to hold some dollars so that you can buy this oil from the main supplier of oil in the world. So it propped up the US dollar artificially as a global reserve currency. Every single country needed to hold some amount of dollars in order to get any oil whatsoever. And it held its footing as the global reserve currency as a result. So with this, newfound sense of security after doing that, what do? Well, we kept on printing, we kept on spending, and we kept on borrowing and raising the national debt. And now, for decades, we masked our cancer symptoms with fake solutions, with printing, borrowing, wars, distractions, blind consumerism, keeping the masses of, all the population of the United States fat and happy, right? And all of a sudden, in 2008, that tumor all of a sudden got really big, and we couldn't ignore it. The cancer warning signs became like serious symptoms at that point. What happened in 2008 was the banks were giving out, risky home loans to people who realistically couldn't pay them back, and they packaged those bad loans into these fake assets and sold them to each other. Each bank was selling them to each other, even internationally, like they were hot potatoes. Who could get rid of them? Because they knew they were ticking time bombs, right? And when people couldn't pay, that entire house of cards just completely collapsed. And it triggered this global panic, And just like the Great Depression, the Fed responded by, what do you think they did? By printing more dollars, by doing the same thing that caused the entire problem in the first place, And they called it at that point quantitative easing, which is just a fancy way of saying that they flooded the system with new dollars to bail out Wall Street, right? They slashed interest rates so low that it was basically free to borrow money, right? And an interest rate, if you don't know, is just like how much it costs to borrow money. So they brought that down so artificially low that anybody could go in the bank and just borrow however much they needed, and that was it. No questions asked. So all of a sudden there's so many more dollars in flow, right? And that propped up the stock market and the housing market, and it made the rich even richer, because what did the people who had some sense of financial literacy do when they could all of a sudden take these huge loans out for almost no cost and then have all that extra money? What do you think they did with it? They invested it into hard assets. So real estate, stocks, stuff like that. And now all of a sudden, there's all these extra dollars chasing those same things. There's only a limited number of houses. There's only a limited number of shares in the stock market. And now you've got more money than ever chasing a limited number of assets. So what does that do to the price of those assets, even though the value of them didn't necessarily go up at all? All of a sudden, those dollars, each dollar, was worth a whole lot less. And it took that many more dollars to buy the same thing that less dollars had been able to buy just a few years ago. And that slowly started to spread this gap between the upper, the middle, and the lower class, slowly dissolving the middle class, right? Who were becoming more and more dependent on credit with stagnant wages and the price of everything just skyrocketing. So that went on for a little bit. And then 2020 hit. They shut down the economy and they handed out stimulus checks while behind the scenes they're bailing out banks and corporations. And during that time, guys, I'm not exaggerating here. During that time, between 2020 and 2022, 80% of every dollar that has ever existed was printed in those 2 years. Let me say that again. Between 2020 and 2022, 80% of every dollar that has ever existed was printed in between those 2 years. Let's just think about that for a second. Right? Meanwhile, the dollar's losing trust at home and abroad. Inflation's eating away at everything that you earn and everything that you save. The upper class and the middle class and the lower class are all at each other's throats, blaming each other because nobody understands how this monetary system works, and that it's really this, puppet master of the Federal Reserve that's creating the circumstances for everybody to need to be at each other's throats. And at this point, debt itself is the only thing that's backing the dollar that everybody's depending on. Because every dollar is printed into existence through debt. Now, does that make sense to you? Because I know that it took me a little bit, because it's so fucking simple that it's like hard to wrap your head around it, right? So let's try to break it down here. A dollar doesn't exist at all until someone takes out a loan, right? From the government, from a bank, or from you swiping your credit card. Now that loan creates the dollar. Every single dollar is a promise to pay interest on money that didn't exist until it was borrowed. Do you get it? That's not money. That's a time bomb. Because the debt is the money. Now, when you take out a mortgage, right, that $500,000 isn't pulled from some vault in the sky somewhere. The bank types in some code, and all of a sudden, that money exists. It types it into existence. That loan becomes a deposit. And new dollars are conjured up like some necromancer out of thin air, right? So, if all the debts were paid off, there'd be no loans, and therefore, no dollars. Because loans create deposits. That's banking in this system, guys. That's banking in this fiat system. That's why we say the dollar is debt. And that's why every time the government says, we're injecting liquidity, what they really mean is, we're taking out another loan that you'll pay for later. Or your kids will pay for. Or your grandkids will pay for. Now, if everyone paid off their debts tomorrow, mortgages, credit cards, government bonds, the entire supply of dollars would vanish. Poof. Gone. The system requires endless debt to fuel it and to keep it existing, to keep it alive. It's like a bicycle, that falls over the second that you stop pedaling. So when the government prints money, what they're really doing is taking out more debt on your behalf. They issue treasury bonds, right? Which are basically just IOUs, and the Fed buys them with fake dollars made out of thin air, out of nothing. Then you, your kids, and their kids are on the hook and have to pay it all back with interest. And the only way to keep this system alive is to create more debt. That's why the prices aren't going up. Your dollar is just buying less. That's what inflation is. Every time they print new dollars, the dollar in your pocket is devalued that much more. Meanwhile, right, all these other countries are ditching the dollar for localized trade, right, for their own national currencies. And that's called de-dollarization. America's global trust is totally collapsing. And here at home, people can't afford rent, they can't afford groceries, and they can't afford homes without drowning in credit debt. We ignored that tumor. And now it's metastasized. And we as a country have months to live. Obviously, that's a little bit of an exaggeration. But I'm talking as if the system itself was a person. It's bigger than that. But even still, I would be shocked. I would be absolutely shocked if we had another decade to carry on like this. I'm going to say that we have probably 7 to 8 years left of this. Tops. Absolutely maximum. So what do we do with all this? Well, first of all, we stop waiting for the system to fix itself, because it's not going to happen. It's on life support. It is in hospice on life support, living off of drug injections into its own bloodstream in order to live. And the second that those injections stop, which is going to happen because the money's going to fucking run out, we're done. The plug's going to get pulled. And the the US dollar as the global reserve currency, which is the only thing that it still has any value left from being, those days are going to be gone. I think it was last June where that deal with the Saudis expired. And, they're still trading in dollars. They haven't expressly said that we're going to stop trading oil for dollars or anything like that. But they are now accepting other currencies other than the dollar. So the US dollar is losing its footing. And you know what? It should happen because we've been irresponsible with our place in the world. But for us, that means we're about to go through that Great Depression on steroids that they've been trying to fucking put off since the 70s. Alright, now, so what the hell do we do with all this, right? Well, pay attention, because here's where the rubber meets the road, so to speak. Because how you respond to this news, to this reality that we're all living in, it totally depends on where you're at right now. So I'm going to break this into 2 tracks, right? One for the guys like me who are young. I'm 29 years old. We're kind of just getting started. We might have not had the best start. We definitely weren't handed anything. And we're out here just trying to build and scrape by and figure it out. And maybe we've got kids. Maybe we've got people that depend on us. And maybe we dropped out of high school and started working in construction after 9th grade. Like I did. We're just figuring it out, man. We live in the real fucking world. So what do we do, right? If you're a struggling dad like me, well, you don't need Wall Street. I'll tell you that right now. What you need is leverage. What you need is sovereignty. So here's some good starting points. First, you got to convert something, right? Skip going to McDonald's this week. Skip going to Starbucks and getting, some foamy latte that's going to cost you $7 or $8, right? And instead of spending that money, save it up for a couple weeks. Go to a pawn shop or a coin shop, right? Buy yourself a couple ounces of silver. A silver dollar is about 1 troy ounce. Anything made before, I think it's 1964. That's 100% or 90-something percent sterling silver. And I've been slowly doing that for myself for a good long time. And now that's my savings account. That's one of my savings accounts. I haven't quite gotten to the point where I've have any significant amount of gold yet, but hey man, I'm stacking that silver. You can get it in smaller quantities, and guess what? If shit went south tomorrow, it's really hard to break down an ounce of gold into something that's easily tradable on a small scale. But hey man, those silver dollars that are worth $40-$50 a pop, yeah, that'll trade really well. Now the next thing you can do is, download something like Strike or Cash App, right? You can get yourself you can buy $1 worth of Bitcoin right now if you want to. And that's a hard asset. That's not going anywhere. It's compounding value over time. And I'm not going to do a whole Bitcoin episode today. That'll come in the future. I'm not going to do a whole silver and investment, episode today. We'll get into that as time goes. But I just want to give you guys a little bit of, light at the end of the tunnel at the end of this episode. That there are things that you can do. It's not hopeless. And you just got to, do the research. Get those gears spinning, right? So go ahead. What's stopping you, man? Go throw $10 at Bitcoin. Find a way to self-custody it, right? Then next, what you want to do is you want to turn your expenses into systems. Like we talked about last week, start a working emergency food pantry. We covered a lot of great stuff from this preparedness mindset in last week's episode. And if you go listen to that, I guarantee you'll walk out with some information that's going to be immediately practical and applicable to your situation, wherever you're at. You know, stock up on some rice, some beans, right? Oats, salt, pepper, the stuff you use every day. Keep track of it. Write it down. Start stocking it up. Create a rotating pantry. Use the oldest stuff first. Put the newest stuff in the back. Bring it all forward when you use something, right? And then replace what you use, so you don't need to go and spend a shit ton of money on everything all at once. Easy. If you got some way to grow food, do it. Grow something, you know? 1 tomato plant, a bucket of potatoes. Just get out there and find ways to produce something. Whether it's, you know, sprouted greens on your windowsill, or, you know, taking the bottoms off some green onions that you got at Costco. Whether it's making pickles out of cucumbers that you got at the local farmer's market. Whether it's buying a bunch of apples that you found on sale, making applesauce and canning it. Whether it's picking a bunch of blackberries that are growing wild in your neighborhood and making a bunch of blackberry preserves and doing a water bath and preserving them. You know, find a way, dude. I know you can do it. I did it. I started as the most sad, pathetic, broke motherfucker. And you know what? I am by no means I'm closer to where I want to be than I was when I first started, when I was, 19, 20 years old. But I am nowhere near close to where I want to be. Start today, this week. Next thing you can do is pick up some skills, man. Take jobs not because of how much money that you can make from them. Take jobs because of what you can learn and the skill sets that you can pick up. Find something that you want to do and do it. Find something that you enjoy enough to get really fucking good at it. And then do that thing. Max it out. And if you get another opportunity to make more money doing the same or something similar somewhere else, take that opportunity. When you take a new job, make sure that you're moving up in the ranks, not just over into a new career. Because that looks shitty on a resume when you do it that way. But when you're always moving up, man, that looks great. Figure out how to fix your own sink. Unclog your own toilet, change your own oil, basic stuff that most of our dads didn't teach us because they were too busy working. And last, get involved locally, man. Find people in your community that are doing similar stuff. Start a Facebook group. Meet people that are in your area that are of the same mind, some of the same ilk. You guys cut from the same cloth. You're thinking about these similar things. And whether or not you see eye to eye, because nobody does, at the very least you can connect on this core that like, hey, shit's screwed up and we need community to be able to help each other and to ride this out. Go meet your neighbors. See if they have anything that they need that you can find a way to supply. Find a way to barter and swap skills with real human beings. Because those connections are going to have so much more value than any form of currency will in an event where everything goes sideways. Now, our second track here, and this is, if you're in your 40s or your 50s and you've got, nice assets in a 401k, right? You've got a lot more to lose, but you've also got a lot more ammo. First, you got to stop trusting the system, dude. Stop taking the default advice of every Joe Blow who has some advice to give you about what to do with your money. Get some of that 401k into a self-directed IRA, right? Own some gold, own some silver, and own some Bitcoin outside of their, paper casino. Find a way to cash out while it's still hot, man. Have you got, a rental property that you're still paying the mortgage on? If it's leveraged, you're exposed. Sell it high, pay off the land, and invest in something that's going to be more resilient for you. Don't buy more toys. It's always fun to buy campers and quads and dirt bikes and all this stuff, kayaks and what have you. And sure, some of that stuff's great. Absolutely, it can improve the quality of your life. But if you're not saving money and spending the money that you could be using to get a generator or a deep freezer or a new water system or a solar system on your house. Backup heating, backup lighting, storage. If you're spending the money that you could be using for practical stuff like that on a new kayak or a new RV, then, hey, dude, all I'm saying is what I'd give to be where you're at. Good for you. I hope you do right by yourself with it. Also, get out there and build real alliances, man. Hire these younger guys who are hungry, who are wanting to work. Barter with tradesmen. See if your plumber would be down to take a couple dozen eggs to shave some dollars off the price of, putting in a new sink and water lines for your house. Additionally, man, be the guy who teaches these young guys who are out here hungry, like myself. Find some way to take the experience and the knowledge that you have, that you've built up in your life, and pass it on. Pass it on to the people who are going to, do something with it beyond your lifespan. Somebody who can be an ally to your son, who is going to teach their kids to be an ally to your grandson. Now, whether you got $5 or you got $50 million, get out from underneath the dollar. Now, today, get out. Get into reality, man. Learn to produce. Learn to build systems of redundancy in your life. Diversify what you have available to you. That's the blueprint. I can't tell you exactly what to do, because I'm still figuring out that for myself in my situation. Maybe I'll have an episode one of these days where I, walk you guys through every single thing that I'm doing. But I'll tell you what, I'm learning, and I'm not some, economist or something that's going to be able to call the shots for you and tell you exactly what to do. I'm the guy who sees the shit dangerously close to hitting the fan and says, hey, dude, you should probably duck. That's it. So wherever you're at, man, start with what you've got. Take some time and create that spending journal that we talked about last week. Take inventory of what you've got in your pantry. Do these little steps that don't cost you anything, and figure out where you can squeeze something out to put into something, to put into assets that are going to retain their value outside of this terminally ill financial system that we're living in. We're on the Titanic right now, guys. We still have a little bit of time to build our life rafts. Are we going to take it seriously? Are we still going to be, sipping on wine and dancing while the whole ship cracks in half and we sink into the ocean? The system's dying, but you don't have to go with it, and neither does your life. And I hope that this episode can get the wheels in your head turning, just like they are for me, and just like they are for millions of other people who are looking out at what's going down, and they're like, man, now's the time to take action. Because, we're not at the point where it's gonna be a 50-year slow decline anymore, guys. We're at the point where that slow decline really starts to speed up. And either we're going to be figuring out our shit on the riverbank when the whole dam busts open and the waters really start to flow, or we're going to get swept away with that current. So where do you want to be? Start figuring it out now. Start making a plan. And I'll be here. And so will so many others who are completely dedicated to finding ways to build a life that thrives in these crazy, unpredictable times, and to get through the shit if things get really bad, or even if they, keep on hanging on by their fingernails for a little bit while longer. The things that we're talking about today are going to make your life better one way or the other. So I think that's going to wrap up episode 10. As always, thank you guys so much for tuning in. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your support. If you want to find ways to help us out, man, the biggest thing that you can do for me right now, man, is to share this with somebody who you know personally. Somebody who's asking these questions. Somebody who could benefit from this information. Somebody who's on the cusp of, pulling their hat out of the sand. If you think we talked about this stuff today in a way that makes sense and can be easily digested by somebody who maybe hasn't walked down this line of thought before, then please share it with them. It helps me out way more than you know. Now, wherever you're listening, please take an extra second and give this show 5 stars. Write a quick 1-sentence written review. It helps us beat the algorithm gods and get this information in front of more people like yourself who hopefully enjoy it and hopefully can benefit from it. If you never want to miss an episode, head over to sustainablesedition.com and go and click on our subscription to our free weekly newsletter where we give weekly updates about the show and what we've got going on in real time. And again, guys, thank you so much for being a part of what we do here. And until next week, keep on growing, keep on learning, and keep on building a life that thrives in changing times.